Some guitar players make songs. Jimi Hendrix made weather. That's the difference. When Hendrix played, it didn't just sound like guitar. It sounded like electricity learning how to speak. It sounded like blues, soul, rock, feedback, outer space, and a fire alarm all getting into the same taxi and somehow arriving exactly on time. And before we get into this, if you like the stories behind the songs, the studio chaos, the strange decisions, the moments where somebody hears one riff and realizes the rules just changed, stick with me. Because Hendrix's greatest hits aren't just songs. They're turning points. And I want to ask you something right up front. Was Jimi Hendrix the greatest guitarist of all time? Not the fastest, not the cleanest, not the most technical. The greatest. Because if you ask 10 music fans that question, somebody will say Hendrix before you even finish the sentence. And by the end of this, you may understand why. Hendrix didn't have a long career at the top. That's the wild part. From late 1966 to 1970, he goes from unknown club performer to one of the most influential musicians in history. That's not a career arc. That's a lightning strike. So let's walk through the songs that built the legend and the stories behind them. Start with Hey Joe. This is where Hendrix first reaches the public, but the song itself already had a history before he touched it. Hey Joe had been floating around the folk and rock scenes for years. Different artists recorded it, different versions existed. It wasn't really owned by one definitive performer yet. Then Hendrix got hold of it, and suddenly, the song changed shape. What makes Hendrix's version so important is restraint. That may sound strange because we think of Hendrix as explosive. Fire, feedback, wild solos. But on Hey Joe, he doesn't blow the doors off immediately. He stalks the song. The tempo slows down. The guitar answers the vocal. The whole thing feels heavier, darker, more dangerous. And that tells you something important about Hendrix right away. He wasn't just a guitarist showing off. He understood atmosphere. Now imagine hearing this in late 1966 if you were used to cleaner pop records. This wasn't neat. It wasn't polite. It sounded like somebody had dragged a blues murder ballad into the psychedelic age and plugged it into an amp with a bad attitude. And here's the thing. This first single was not a massive American breakthrough. Hendrix had to go to London to be properly understood first. Chas Chandler, formerly of the Animals, saw him in New York, believed in him, brought him to England, and helped form the Jimi Hendrix Experience with Noel Redding on bass and Mitch Mitchell on drums. Within months, Hendrix had 3 UK top 10 hits, including Hey Joe, Purple Haze, and The Wind Cries Mary. So let me ask you this. What if London had not understood him first? Would America have caught up? Or would Hendrix have stayed one of those musicians other musicians whispered about in clubs? Because that almost happened. Now move to Purple Haze. This is the moment Hendrix stops being interesting and becomes unavoidable. The opening riff does not sound friendly. It sounds like a warning. There's that jagged interval, that heavy distortion, that feeling that the song is slightly unstable before it even starts moving. And then Hendrix comes in with lyrics that people have argued about for decades. Drug song? Dream song? Science fiction? Confusion? Hendrix himself gave different explanations over time, including the idea of walking under the sea in a dream. And honestly, that almost makes more sense than trying to reduce it to one meaning. Because Purple Haze is not really about explanation. It is about sensation. Now here's where the story gets good. Producer Chas Chandler helped tighten the song. Early versions were longer and more sprawling, but Chandler understood radio. He helped cut it down without killing the strangeness. That is not easy. Too much trimming, and it becomes normal. Too little and radio ignores it. They found the line. And the recording itself pushed sound forward. Hendrix used fuzz, feedback, and the Octavia effect to create tones that didn't sound like standard guitar language anymore. Engineer Eddie Kramer later became a crucial part of helping Hendrix translate those ideas in the studio. One recent account even notes that Hendrix recorded Purple Haze on a Telecaster after damaging his Stratocaster, which is one of those details that makes guitar players sit up immediately. Now ask yourself this. How many artists get a signature sound from perfect planning? And how many get it because something breaks, something goes wrong, and they adapt faster than everybody else? That's Hendrix. He didn't just play through accidents. He turned them into vocabulary. Then comes The Wind Cries Mary. And this is where Hendrix pulls a fast one on everybody. Because after Purple Haze, you might expect the next move to be louder, wilder, more aggressive. Instead, he gives you something tender. The Wind Cries Mary is reportedly inspired by an argument with his girlfriend, Kathy Etchingham. Mary was one of her middle names, and the song comes out of that domestic moment, not some giant psychedelic vision, not an apocalyptic dream, just an argument and the emotional residue afterward. That's what makes it beautiful. It's intimate. And here's the part I love about it. Hendrix writes with imagery that feels poetic without becoming stiff. A broom is drearily sweeping up the broken pieces of yesterday's life. That line sounds like a movie shot. Empty street, morning after, silence after the argument. And musically, he does something brilliant. He leaves space. A lot of guitar players hear space and panic. Hendrix hears space and paints inside it. So which Hendrix do you prefer? The fire-breathing Hendrix of Purple Haze, or the emotional, restrained Hendrix of The Wind Cries Mary? Because the fact that both exist in the same artist is exactly why the legend holds. Now let's talk about Foxy Lady. This one is pure swagger. The song starts with feedback, but not random feedback. Controlled feedback, that matters. Most players at the time were trying to avoid noise. Hendrix was learning how to aim it. And Foxy Lady is a perfect example of Hendrix turning stage energy into a record. The riff is simple, but it carries attitude. The vocal is playful, but also charged. And the whole thing feels like a club performance that somehow got trapped on tape. Now let me ask you something. Can a song be iconic just because of attitude? Because Foxy Lady makes a strong case. It is not the most complex Hendrix composition. It is not the deepest lyric, but the identity is undeniable. You know who it is within seconds. That's rare. And for Hendrix, identity mattered. He was entering a British rock scene full of guitar heroes: Clapton, Beck, Townshend, Page coming up fast. You needed something that set you apart immediately. Foxy Lady did that. It said, "This is not just another blues rock player. This is a new kind of star." Now we have to talk about fire. Because if Foxy Lady is swagger, fire is motion. This song is built for speed and release. Mitch Mitchell's drumming is a huge part of why it works. Mitchell did not play like a simple timekeeper. He played with jazz instincts, fast fills, movement, explosive accents, and that gave Hendrix room to fly. This is one of the key things people miss about the experience. It wasn't just Jimi. Yes, Hendrix is the gravitational center, obviously, but Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding helped create the launch pad. The rhythm section had to be flexible enough to follow him without collapsing into chaos. That is harder than it sounds. Hendrix could stretch time, push tempo, explode into noise, pull back suddenly, and if the band didn't react, the whole thing falls apart. Fire works because everybody is moving. It is tight and wild at the same time. Now imagine being a drummer behind Hendrix. Would you try to control him? Or would you just hang on and hope the building survives? Now let's move to Little Wing. This may be the most beautiful thing Hendrix ever recorded. And I know that's a big statement, but listen to the intro. Just the intro. It feels like a complete emotional world before the vocal even begins. Hendrix reportedly described the song as being inspired by the Monterey Pop Festival atmosphere, the girls, the energy, the dreamlike feeling of that moment. Whether you hear it as a woman, a spirit, a guardian angel, or a memory, Little Wing feels like something delicate that could disappear if you touch it too hard. And that is what makes the guitar work so astonishing. He doesn't overplay, he decorates. Curtis Mayfield's influence is often heard in Hendrix's rhythm style, especially the delicate chord embellishments and melodic fills. Little Wing is a perfect example of that influence becoming something completely Hendrix. It's soul guitar, blues feeling, and psychedelic color, all folded together. Here's a question. Is Little Wing a guitar solo pretending to be a song? Or is it a song so complete that the guitar becomes the narrator? Because that intro says more in under a minute than some players say in an entire album. Now let's go into Castles Made of Sand. This one is Hendrix's storyteller, and it is darker than people remember. The song moves through scenes of disappointment, loss, and collapse. Every verse is basically a little tragedy. The title image is simple, almost childlike castles made of sand slipping into the sea, but the meaning is brutal. Everything temporary, everything fragile, everything you build can disappear. Now remember, Hendrix is often treated as this cosmic guitar god, but songs like this show how grounded his writing could be. He understood disappointment, he understood instability. His early life had plenty of it. And musically, the track has a backward guitar effect that gives it that strange, floating quality. It feels like memory running in reverse. Let me ask you this. Do you think Hendrix gets enough credit as a lyricist? Because I don't. People talk about the guitar so much that they sometimes miss the writing. But Castles Made of Sand proves he could build emotional images that lasted. Now we get to All Along the Watchtower. This is one of the greatest cover versions ever recorded, and maybe the greatest example of an artist taking someone else's song and making it sound like destiny. Bob Dylan wrote it. Jimi Hendrix transformed it. Hendrix began recording his version in January 1968 at Olympic Studios in London. According to accounts from the session history, he had access to Dylan tapes through publicist Michael Goldstein and initially considered another Dylan song before focusing on All Along the Watchtower. The final recording featured Hendrix on lead vocals, lead guitar, slide guitar, acoustic guitar, and even bass, with Mitch Mitchell on drums, Dave Mason on 12-string acoustic, and Brian Jones adding percussion. Now think about what that means. He didn't just cover Dylan, he rebuilt Dylan's song as if he had discovered the storm hidden inside it. Dylan's original is spare, mysterious, almost skeletal. Hendrix turns it into weather. Guitars swirl, the rhythm pushes. The whole thing feels like an alarm bell from the end of the world. And here's the ultimate compliment. Dylan himself later praised Hendrix's version, and over time Dylan's own live performances began reflecting Hendrix's interpretation more than his original recording. Hendrix's version became his highest charting US single, and his only US top 40 hit, reaching number 20 on the Billboard Hot 100. It also reached number 5 in the UK. So here's the debate. When does a cover stop being a cover? Because All Along the Watchtower may be the moment a song changes ownership without paperwork. Now let's talk about Crosstown Traffic. This one is quick, sharp, and often underrated. Compared to the epic sweep of Watchtower or Voodoo Child, Crosstown Traffic is almost compact, but that is why it works. It has a punchy rhythm, a gritty vocal, and that kazoo-like sound that gives the track its edge. Hendrix reportedly created some of those unusual textures through studio experimentation, including comb and paper-style sounds layered into the track. This is where Hendrix's humor comes through. People forget he could be funny, not comedy song funny, but sly. Crosstown Traffic is basically a relationship traffic jam. Everything is blocked. Nobody is moving. The metaphor is simple, but the energy is great. And this is important because Hendrix wasn't always floating in cosmic seriousness. He had groove, he had wit, he had pop instincts. Could Hendrix have made tighter, funkier records in the 70s if he had lived? I think yes. And Crosstown Traffic is part of the evidence. Now we arrive at Voodoo Child, and we need to separate two things. There is Voodoo Chili, the long blues jam on Electric Ladyland. And there is Voodoo Child Slight Return, the shorter, explosive track most people mean when they say Voodoo Child. The long version is Hendrix stretching out with musicians including Steve Winwood on organ and Jack Cassidy on bass. It is deep blues, but expanded into something massive. The shorter version, Slight Return, is the lightning bolt. That wah-wah intro, come on. There are sounds in rock history that announce themselves like a door being kicked open. This is one of them. Hendrix wasn't using the wah-wah as a gimmick. He made it vocal. He made it snarl. He made it sound alive. Electric Ladyland, the album that contains these tracks, was Hendrix's most successful release and his only US #1 album. It was also a chaotic recording process, with guests, repeated takes, perfectionism, and growing tension. Chaz Chandler eventually became frustrated with Hendrix's studio methods and the crowded sessions, contributing to the end of their working relationship. That matters because you can hear the ambition. Hendrix was not trying to make a normal rock album. He was trying to build a universe. Now let's talk about Machine Gun. This one is not always listed with the hits, but if we're talking greatest Hendrix performances, it belongs in the conversation. Recorded live with Band of Gypsies at the Fillmore East, Machine Gun is one of the most powerful anti-war performances in rock history. And here's why it matters. Hendrix doesn't just sing about war. He makes the guitar become war. Gunfire, explosions, screams, sirens, all from the instrument. That is not showing off. That is storytelling. By this point, Hendrix is moving away from the Experience format and exploring deeper funk, soul, and improvisational grooves with Billy Cox on bass and Buddy Miles on drums. The feel is different, heavier in the pocket, more grounded, less psychedelic flash, more rhythmic weight, and it points toward where Hendrix might have gone next. That's the painful part, because you can hear the future forming. Now ask yourself, if Hendrix had lived through the 70s, does he move toward funk, jazz, fusion, soul, hard rock? All of it, probably all of it. That is the tragedy of Hendrix. We don't just lose the artist, we lose the next 10 versions of the artist. And finally, we have to talk about the Star-Spangled Banner at Woodstock. Not a hit single in the traditional sense, but one of the most famous performances in American music. This is Hendrix taking the national anthem and turning it into a battlefield. Feedback becomes bombs, bends become sirens, distortion becomes protest without a single lyric. And here's why it still matters. People argued about it then, and they still argue about it now. Was it disrespectful? Was it patriotic? Was it protest? Was it truth? Maybe yes to all of it. That's what great art does. It refuses to sit quietly in one category. And Hendrix, a black veteran playing the anthem at the end of the 1960s, during Vietnam, at Woodstock, in front of a generation questioning everything, you cannot separate the sound from the moment. So let me ask you, Could any other guitarist have made that statement without saying a word? Because I'm not sure they could. That's the Hendrix difference. He didn't just play notes, he created meaning out of sound itself. When you step back from these songs, the pattern becomes clear. Hey Joe introduces the atmosphere. Purple Haze breaks the door open. The Wind Cries Mary proves he can be tender. Foxy Lady builds the persona. Fire shows the band's explosive chemistry. Little Wing reveals the poet. Castles Made of Sand reveals the storyteller. All Along the Watchtower proves he can transform another artist's song into his own. Crosstown Traffic shows his wit and groove. Voodoo Child turns guitar into mythology. Machine Gun turns guitar into protest. And the Star-Spangled Banner turns guitar into history. That is not just a greatest hits list. That is an argument. An argument that Hendrix didn't simply change guitar playing. He changed what a rock musician could be. A performer, a producer, a sonic architect, a bluesman, a futurist, a showman, a poet, all at once. And the wildest part, he was still evolving. That's the thing I keep coming back to. We talk about Hendrix like a completed story, but he was only 27 when he died. 27. Most artists are just figuring out who they are at that age. Hendrix had already changed the language of electric guitar. So where do you put him? Greatest guitarist ever? Greatest live performer of the era? Most influential rock musician of the late 60s? Or is he in a category by himself? Drop it in the comments. I want to know where you rank Hendrix and which song you think proves your point. And if you're just here to sit back, let the amps warm up, and hear the story of a man who made the guitar sound like the future, relax and spark one up. Keep that turntable spinning.